Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Ronan's hands moved with precision, chiseling away at the block of stone before him. The rhythmic sound of hammer striking steel, followed by the soft fall of stone dust, was his solace. The sun barely kissed the horizon when he began, and now it sat high in the sky, casting long shadows across his humble workshop. Every curve of the sculpture was deliberate, each detail painstakingly etched into the stone. It was a modest life, but it was a good one. The people of his village respected his craft, and Ronan took pride in knowing his work adorned the squares and homes of nearly everyone in the valley. There was beauty in the simplicity of carving something from the earth, turning raw stone into something that could stir the soul. But Ronan had ambitions. He wasn't content with merely decorating the village with statues of local heroes or family crests. He dreamed of creating something that would outlast him, a monument that people would travel far and wide to see. Yet, ambition in such a small village often felt like a bird trapped in a cage, fluttering against the bars with no way to escape. On one particular day, as Ronan ventured up into the mountains to search for stone, he found something unusual. The mountains had always been generous to him, yielding rare marble or rich veins of granite. But today was different. As he pushed aside some loose rocks in a small cavern, his eyes fell on a peculiar stone. It wasn't large, no bigger than his fist, and it glowed faintly with a soft, pulsing light. Intrigued, he reached out and touched it. A surge of warmth spread through his fingers, up his arm, and into his chest. For a moment, he pulled his hand back, but curiosity overpowered caution. He gripped the stone and lifted it to eye level. It was mesmerizing, smooth and flawless, yet it seemed alive, as if something ancient stirred within it. "This is something special," Ronan whispered to himself. He wasn't sure how, but he knew it was. With great care, he wrapped it in cloth and carried it back to his workshop. That night, Ronan couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts of the stone. What was it? Why did it glow like that? The questions gnawed at him, and finally, in the dim light of his workshop, he unwrapped it again. As he held it, the warmth returned, but this time it felt stronger, almost pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He set the stone on the table and picked up his chisel. Something drove him to work, an urge he couldn't quite explain. The stone seemed to hum softly in the background, and as he began carving a new sculpture, his hands moved more fluidly than ever before. Every strike of the chisel was perfect, every detail emerging as though it had been waiting to be released from the stone. Hours passed, yet Ronan didn't tire. His movements grew faster, more confident, and when he finally stepped back, he gasped. Before him stood a statue so lifelike, it was as if the figure would step down from the pedestal at any moment. The eyes, the folds of the cloak, the hands, the detail was beyond anything Ronan had ever achieved before. He stared at his work, heart pounding. This is impossible, he muttered, but he couldn't deny what he saw. Somehow, the stone had given him the ability to create something beyond his wildest dreams. The next few days passed in a blur. Word spread quickly through the village of Ronan's new masterpiece, and soon he was being visited by people from neighboring towns, all eager to commission work from him. His fame grew, and with it, his wealth. But with every sculpture, with every use of the stone, something else grew too, an unsettling coldness deep in his chest. At first, it was easy to ignore. The rush of success, the satisfaction of creating perfection, filled him with a sense of purpose. He worked day and night, pushing himself to new heights. But the more he used the stone, the more detached he became. Simple pleasures no longer brought him joy. Meals were eaten quickly, without taste. Conversations with his wife, Mara, grew shorter, more distant. His son, Liam, once the center of his world, became an afterthought, a distraction from the work that consumed him. "Ronan, you're working too much," Mara said one evening as she placed dinner on the table. "You haven't spent any time with Liam in days." Ronan barely looked up from the sketch he was working on. "I'm busy. There's another commission, an important one. I can't afford to stop now." Mara frowned, her brow creased with worry. "It's not just about the work, Ronan. You've changed. You're colder. I don't know how to explain it, but you're not the same man you were." He waved her off, irritation bubbling to the surface. "I'm fine. It's just stress. These commissions are important for us, for our future." But Mara wasn't convinced. The distance between them grew with each passing day, and soon Ronan found himself alone in the workshop more often than not. His family, his friends, even his own sense of self seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the singular drive to create, to perfect his craft, to harness the power of the stone. Then, one day, something happened that Ronan couldn't ignore. His young apprentice, Tomas, was helping him in the workshop, carefully moving some finished pieces to be delivered. In his haste, Tomas tripped and knocked over a half-finished sculpture. The sound of shattering stone filled the room, and Ronan's blood ran cold. Tomas scrambled to his feet, his face pale with fear. "I'm sorry, Master Ronan. I didn't mean to." Ronan's eyes were icy as he turned toward the boy. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But Master, I said, get out." Ronan bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Tomas didn't need to be told again. He fled the workshop, tears streaming down his face. Ronan stood there, breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. The broken statue lay in pieces at his feet, but it wasn't the destruction that bothered him. It was the fact that he felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no regret. Just emptiness. That night, Ronan stared at his reflection in the mirror. His once warm, brown eyes were now cold and hard, like the very stone he worked with. His skin, once tanned from years of working outdoors, had taken on a pale, almost grayish hue. His hands, calloused from years of chiseling, felt heavier, less nimble. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. But deep down, he knew. The stone was changing him, not just his heart but his body too. He was becoming something else, something inhuman. Desperate for answers, Ronan sought out Elias, the old hermit who lived on the edge of the village. Elias was a strange man, known for his eccentricities, but there were rumors that he possessed ancient knowledge, that he understood things others didn't. When Ronan arrived at Elias's hut, the old man greeted him with a knowing look. "You found the stone, haven't you?" Ronan frowned. "How do you know?" Elias motioned for him to sit. "I've seen it before. You're not the first to be tempted by its power, nor will you be the last." "What is it?" Ronan asked, leaning forward. "Why is it doing this to me?" "The stone is alive," Elias said, his voice grave. "It feeds on your emotions, your humanity. In exchange, it gives you power, power beyond your wildest dreams. But the more you use it, the more it consumes you. Eventually, it will turn you into stone, body and soul." Ronan felt a chill run down his spine. There has to be a way to stop it. To break the curse. "There is," Elias said. "But it won't be easy. You must return the stone to the Cave of Echoes, deep within the mountains where you found it. Only by destroying it there can you break the curse." "And if I don't?" Ronan asked, though he already knew the answer, then you will become nothing more than a statue, frozen in time, your soul trapped within the stone for eternity. The weight of Elias's words settled over Ronan like a heavy blanket. He had to make a choice: continue down the path of power and lose himself completely, or give up everything he had gained and try to reclaim his humanity. Ronan left Elias's hut with the old man's words echoing in his mind. The weight of the truth pressed down on him, heavier than any stone he had ever carved. The power that once felt like a blessing now revealed itself as a curse, threatening to consume him entirely. He had to return the stone, but the path ahead filled him with dread. The Cave of Echoes was no ordinary place. It was a place where few ventured and even fewer returned. Still, there was no other choice. His hands, now stiff and cold like the stone they worked with, reminded him of the price he was paying. Each passing day, his transformation became more evident. His skin grew harder, his emotions more distant, until even the thought of his family felt like a fading memory. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of stone encasing his heart, Ronan clung to a sliver of hope, the hope that he could still save himself. That night, he prepared for the journey. He packed lightly, taking only what he needed: food, water, and a few simple tools. As he slung his pack over his shoulder, he glanced back at his workshop, now littered with unfinished statues and sketches. His heart ached, but not for the loss of his craft. He ached for what he had become, and for the family he had pushed away. Mara was asleep when Ronan quietly stepped into their home. He stood by the door, watching her for a long moment, remembering the warmth they once shared. Liam, their son, was curled up in his small bed, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Guilt twisted in Ronan's gut, but he couldn't bring himself to wake them. He wasn't sure what he could say. Instead, he left a note on the table, explaining his absence as best as he could without frightening them. It was a coward's way out, but he had no words for the shame he felt. With one last glance at his sleeping family, he stepped out into the cold night and began his journey toward the mountains. The path was familiar at first, the same route he had taken countless times in search of stone. But as he climbed higher, the terrain grew more treacherous. The ground beneath his feet shifted from solid earth to jagged rock, and the air grew thin and cold. Each step was a reminder of how far he had come and how far he had yet to go. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. The stone's influence gnawed at his mind, urging him to turn back, to abandon his quest and embrace the power it offered. But Ronan fought against it, clinging to the memory of who he once was. The thought of his son, of the life he had left behind, kept him moving forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ronan reached the mouth of the Cave of Echoes. The entrance was nothing more than a narrow crevice in the mountainside, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the stone walls. Ronan's breath came in ragged gasps as he ventured deeper into the cave, the darkness swallowing him whole. It wasn't long before he heard it, the whispers. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but they grew louder with each step. The voices seemed to come from all around him, disembodied and ancient, their words indistinct yet filled with malice. They called to him, beckoning him deeper into the cave, promising him power beyond his wildest dreams. Ronan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he tried to shut out the voices. He knew what they were. They were the echoes of those who had come before him, those who had succumbed to the stone's curse and lost themselves in its power. He would not be one of them. He refused. At last, Ronan reached the heart of the cave. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, the stone pulsed with life, brighter than ever before. It seemed to hum in anticipation as Ronan approached, its glow casting long shadows across the chamber. For a moment, Ronan hesitated. The power was palpable, calling to him, offering him everything he had ever wanted. All he had to do was reach out and take it. But then he thought of Mara, of Liam, of the life he had once cherished. He thought of the man he had been before the stone had come into his life. And with a steely resolve, he knew what he had to do. He raised his chisel, the same tool that had once been his greatest ally, and brought it down with all his strength. The chisel struck the stone with a sharp crack, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the stone shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment glowing for a brief second before fading into darkness. The chamber shook, the walls trembling as the magic that had once filled the stone dissipated into the air. Ronan fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his body racked with pain. He could feel the transformation reversing, his flesh softening, his heart thawing. But the process was slow, agonizing, and he knew that he would never fully recover. When the trembling stopped, Ronan was left alone in the darkness. The whispers had ceased, the cave now silent and still. He sat there for a long time, staring at the remains of the stone, his mind reeling from what he had just done. The power was gone, and with it, the weight that had pressed down on his soul. Ronan didn't know how long he sat there, but eventually, he rose to his feet. His body felt weak, his limbs heavy, but he was free. Free from the stone, free from its curse. He had done it. He had reclaimed his humanity. The journey back to the village was long and arduous. Without the stone's power to sustain him, Ronan was forced to rely on his own strength, and it was not enough. His hands, now permanently hardened like stone, ached with every step, and his heart felt raw, vulnerable. But with each passing day, he felt a flicker of warmth return to his chest, a warmth that had been absent for far too long. When he finally reached the village, it was dusk. The streets were quiet, the sun casting a golden glow over the rooftops. Ronan's feet carried him toward his home, though he wasn't sure what awaited him there. Would Mara still be waiting for him? Would Liam even recognize the man he had become? As he approached the house, he saw a figure standing in the doorway. Mara. She stood there, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Ronan hesitated, fear gripping him. He had faced the stone's curse, but this, facing the woman he had wronged, felt infinitely more terrifying. Mara, he said, his voice hoarse from the journey. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Inside, the house was warm, the hearth fire crackling softly in the corner. Liam was playing with a small wooden toy at the table, his back turned to Ronan. When the boy finally noticed him, his eyes widened in surprise. "Papa?" Liam said, his voice small and uncertain. Ronan's throat tightened. "Yes, son. I'm home." Liam hesitated for only a second before running to him, throwing his arms around his father's waist. Ronan knelt, pulling his son close, the warmth of the embrace filling the emptiness that had plagued him for so long. Mara watched from the doorway, her expression still guarded. Are you back for good?" Ronan met her gaze, his heart heavy with regret. "If you'll have me. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I've broken the curse. I'm not the man I was, Mara. I want to try again. To be the husband and father you deserve." For a moment, Mara said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "We'll see, Ronan. We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ronan felt hope. The days that followed were slow and difficult. Ronan's hands, though still strong, had lost some of their finesse, and he found that carving no longer came as easily as it once had. But that was all right. He didn't need to be perfect anymore. He didn't need to create masterpieces or seek out fame. He had what truly mattered: his family, his home, and the knowledge that he had faced the darkness within himself and emerged victorious. In the evenings, Ronan would sit with Liam, teaching him the basics of stone carving. His hands, now rough and worn, struggled with the finer details, but Liam's laughter and enthusiasm made up for it. Slowly, life began to return to the way it had been before the stone had entered their lives, though Ronan knew he would never be the same. He was marked now, both physically and emotionally, by the curse he had carried. But those marks were a reminder, not of his failure, but of his strength. He had been tested, and though he had stumbled, he had found his way back. As the seasons changed, so did Ronan. The stone's influence had left him, but it had also taught him a valuable lesson, one he would carry with him for the rest of his days. Power, no matter how tempting, could never replace the warmth of human connection. And though his hands would never again create the masterpieces they once had, his heart had found its true calling.